I am, in my day job, a researcher over at the National Institute of Education, and the focus of the research that I do is in the area of autism, and very specifically we are very interested over at NIE how to better teach students with ASD and as well as understand their development. But for today, I'm also serving as the facilitator for the symposium. And I think for those of us who are in the organizing committee, we are very excited to see how so many people have come together for this, because we really believe that individuals with autism spectrum disorder are part of all of us, and we want to do our very best to have them, to have people with autism in as many places as possible. So I'd like to give a round of applause to all of us for being here. Also, what you will find in symposiums like that is that you will find many people on your left and right that you do not know. And it's always unnerving. And what you'll find today is that we are almost at full capacity. Actually, we had a full registration, and we actually were at a point where we had to unfortunately turn some people away. So let's take this time also to say hi to the person on your left and on your right. Okay, this is unnerving, but it's normal, okay? But let's try to just stand ourselves a little bit and say hi to everyone over here. And you know why this is so important, or rather this is so apt? Because we are in this place called Agape Village. Agape means love. And it's a village. And I think that is very much our vision for how society will be like for individuals, for all individuals. But in today, that is our hope for individuals with autism spectrum disorders. So we've got a very exciting program lined up for today. But before we start, I'd like to invite, before that. First of all, our PDPA notification. What is going to happen is that we are going to be taking videos as well as photographs throughout this session. So if you do have any concerns about being photographed, please let the organizing committee right at the back know about that. And to get us started, we'd like to invite also our Reverend Father Benedict Chung to lead us in prayer. Get us started.
Let's bow our head and come into the presence of the Father. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise for this day that you have given to us. And as we come together as one body of Christ, we ask that you send forth your Spirit and your graces and blessings upon the speakers and to all of us. And so that in this symposium, we will get to know more about autism. And we also thank the various talents and gifts that you have bestowed on our speakers. And so today we commend everything to you in your hands, and we also like to thank the organizing committee. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Father. Part of the job of the organizing committee is also to get to talk about the housekeeping issues as well. So, but in line with what we do in the field of autism spectrum disorders, we believe a lot in visuals. So we've got a couple of reminders over here for us. First of all, we'd like to request very respectfully that you could put your phones or other mobile, any devices that can make sounds on silent. We would also like to request that there is no photography or filming over here. For those of you who need a biological break in the middle of the session, bathrooms are just outside. So if you were to just head to the entrance of this place, you will find that the bathrooms are just next to the elevators or the lifts. We are also very cognizant that we need to fill our heads, we also need to fill ourselves. So we have a break at 10:40, thereabouts, where we'll have a little refreshments. Then it's going to be a relatively short break, but so as to allow us to pack in as much information as possible. But we'll have a break at 10:40, so that gives us some means of seeing how long we can take. I had earlier talked about handouts, so all of you should have a set of handouts. All the speakers have sent them and we have printed them. But if you do need a set, we have a station over at that corner over there, and helpers who can be sending you the handouts as well, who can be giving you the handouts. We have also uploaded the handouts on our Facebook site, so you can also access it from there. And what you will find is that we have also adopted the purple ribbon as our sign for people who are the helpers in this session. So if you do need any help in any way, please feel free to approach anyone with a purple ribbon or a red sash. Okay. So that's about, actually we've got just one more bit of information. So what is going to happen through this talk is that we will, in the interest of time, not have any question and answers as during the individual speaker presentations. But as and when the questions come, we would like to invite you to either keep them in your head, write them somewhere that you can ask later, or for those of us who are very, very much plugged in, we have set up a Facebook page. So this is the link. I've heard something that it may not be working, so try to find this. If not, just go to Facebook and type ASD Symposium. And then we've got this page over here called Living with Autism Spectrum Disorders Symposium. And there are two things which are pertinent over there. The first is that I would like to invite you to post questions that you have along the way. So that way, questions which you have can be posted down there. We will refer to those questions during question and answer later that will occur the panel. Another thing that will happen is that we may not have the time to respond to all the questions, so we would like those of you who think that that question is especially relevant to you to like that question, so that then we will get a sense as to which are the questions which mean more to people over here. All right? But of course, we will also have time, so if you have questions during the panel, you can also come up to ask questions. We will respect different modes of communication over here. And I'll flash this page again later. So here is the program that I talked about earlier. We have just started, and we go on till 1 p.m. today with a break at 10:40. Schedules are important. So before we start, one of the things that we understand from the registrations is that we have people coming from all walks of life. Some are caregivers, some are professionals. Some of us are working with young children with ASD. Some of us have adults with ASD. So we would like to start off by getting everyone on the same page with a short video. But before that, Kevin is moving around with pens, and so if you want, if you like a pen to fill in the surveys that come, the feedback survey, or if you like to fill in or write something on your handouts, do let us know as well. But let's start off with just a short video on autism, and this is taken from the National Autistic Society in the UK.
You know somebody with autism. Autism is much, much more common than most people think. About 1 in 100 people have autism. That's more than 700,000 in the UK alone. So chances are that someone you know, or work with, or love, has the condition. What is autism? Autism is a lifelong developmental disability that affects how we communicate with and relate to others, and it affects how we make sense of the world around us. Lots of things that people take for granted, like body language and metaphors, can be confusing and alienating for us. Autism is a spectral condition, so that whilst we all share certain difficulties, our autism will affect us in different ways. Some of us have been to university and hold down jobs, whilst others need a lifetime of specialist support. Asperger's syndrome is a form of autism. People with Asperger's syndrome are often of average or above average intelligence. They have fewer problems with speech, but may still have difficulties with understanding and processing language. What is autism like? For us, the world can be a confusing mass of people, events, and places. Sometimes we struggle to make sense of the world, and this can make us anxious. Every person with autism is different. That's what makes it so difficult to understand. But some of the characteristics that we have include a love of routine, sensory issues such as noises or smells or light, and having special interests. Some of us experience difficulties in understanding and relating to other people, and having a social life can be that much harder for us. For some of us, for example, going to a party can be really hard because we don't know what's going to happen or who will be there, and it often gets too noisy, which can be upsetting. Other people with autism have trouble reading facial expression, understanding jokes or sarcasm, or common phrases like break a leg. Even phrases people use every day like it's cool can be disorientating. You think they're asking you to turn the air conditioning off. Many people with autism don't look disabled. Parents of children with autism often say that people simply think their child is naughty, while we adults find that we are misunderstood. That is why it is called a hidden disability. What causes autism? The exact cause of autism is still being investigated, but research suggests that a combination of factors, genetic and environmental, may account for changes in brain development. Autism is not caused by a person's upbringing or their social circumstances. Is there a cure? There is no cure for autism, but there are interventions that enable learning and development which may be helpful. You can find out more by going to www.autism.org.uk/project. Diagnosis. If you or someone you know thinks they have autism, they can contact their GP who can refer them to a specialist diagnosis. So how can you help? There are many good people doing good work for autism up and down the country, but we need the support of the wider community. Together we can break down barriers. Together we can ensure that autism, which is far more common than other conditions that get far more attention, remains on the agenda. We hope that you will join us in helping more people with autism lead the life they choose. If you want to learn more about autism, go to www.autism.org.uk or click here. You can receive continuous news and information about autism by becoming a member of the National Autistic Society. As a member, you will receive Your Autism magazine quarterly, which includes news about autism, stories from people living with autism, practical tips, and much more. You will also receive regular e-newsletters, an autism alert card, and exclusive voting rights which help influence how the National Autistic Society, the leading UK charity for people with autism, can continue to help people with autism. Accept difference, not indifference. Thank you.
So this is a slide, this is a video presentation from the UK, but we do have many local resources as well, and you'll find them at the end of the slides of the first speaker. But let's get us all on the same page in terms of what autism spectrum disorders are. So in this talk, we will use autism relatively loosely. So when we talk about autism, we are meaning autism spectrum disorders. The first thing is that we understand that autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It means that it's a condition that is due to differences in how the brain develops. We know that it is not due to bad parenting. I had a lot of parents who asked me now, was it because I didn't pay attention to my children? We know that it's not the case. Autism may be identified early we know that symptoms of the early signs of autism can be present as early as 1.5 years of age, or even before that, but they are not always clear in all children. So most children with autism in Singapore are identified about 3 to 4 years of age. Autism is also no longer a rare condition. When I was studying about, I couldn't tell you how long ago, my professor would say that autism would occur 1 in every 1,000 people. We now know that it's at least 1 in 100. There are some statistics that suggest that it's 1 in 88 people. So depending on where you go, but 1 in 100 now is a very conservative figure. So just think about that. When you go into a school, we should be looking at, for every 1,000 children, we should be seeing 10 children with ASD. Autism also has impact across all areas of life, but we have a large range of people with autism, as the video was suggesting. We have some individuals that need a lot of help, but we also have a Nobel Prize winner with autism. So just because a person has autism does not mean that a person has an intellectual disability. It also does not mean that a person is a genius. Every person is different. And I think I'd just like to wrap up before I hand the mic over to Dr. Sylvia Chu, that autism is also a lifelong condition. That is our understanding, and that is understanding across the broader scientific community. But people do find ways to live with autism, just as I am terribly myopic. I can't see any of you this way. But I found a way to live with it. And people have accepted me for wearing glasses. So I think what we are trying to do now within the field is to find ways to help people with autism wear the glasses so that they can see better and navigate around society, and also for society to accept people with autism, with all the wonderful works that they bring that makes our life very joyful. And so I think that brings us to our first presentation. And I'd like to invite to the stage Dr. Sylvia Chu, who's going to be talking about early signs of autism and how to seek help. So Dr. Sylvia Chu is a senior consultant over at the Department of Child Development over at KK Women's and Children's Hospital. Her interests are in family-centered care, parent education and training, as well as the provision of early intervention in the natural environments of the child. Always a very humble person, and she doesn't want me to write it down there that she's a very dedicated physician. And it's a hot favorite among all her clients as well. So let us put our hands together.
Okay, sorry, give me a minute. Sorry, also not used to doing things in different ways. I'm used to speaking with slides in front of me, so, but I think the controls at the back, so we'll just try and be coordinated, and also holding a mic, not used to doing that as well. Okay, anyway, let's get started. Good morning, thank you for coming this morning, and it's so early in the morning on a Saturday, but I guess it shows off everyone's sort of dedication and commitment. I think my talk is directed to people who may have children, young children whom they think may have some concerns about. So, well, it may not be so relevant to people who already have relatives or children or friends who are diagnosed with autism, but, well, it's an introduction of sorts. Okay, that's the rough agenda. I'll try and keep the time if I can. Okay. Okay, let's start off with some social milestones. You know, when when we are learning about children, we always think about when they walk and when they talk as being very important social milestones, but we know actually that there are lots of social things that are very important as well. So by about 7 months of age, usually children will turn their head when their name is called. They will smile back at another person. Usually that happens much, much earlier. Maybe at about 6 weeks, they will be smiling at you when you call them or when you talk to them, babies. They'll respond to sound with sounds, and they enjoy social play like peekaboo games. You know, when you put your hand behind a blanket and you play peekaboo with babies. At about 1 year, they usually are able to use simple gestures like wave bye-bye, flying kiss, make sounds like ma and da, imitate actions in play, clap when you clap your hands, respond when told no, although they may not actually follow your instructions. They may do simple pretend play by about 18 months, so like making Milo or pouring things from a teacup. They may talk on the toy phone, especially nowadays with kids all being very exposed to media. They will usually point to interesting objects, so sort of show things that they are interested in. I'll show you some examples of that. They'll look at objects that you point out. So when you want them to say, want to show them that's the moon, that's a bird, that's a car, that's an MRT train, you point it out to them. Usually the kids will follow and look at what you're pointing them out to. They'll also use several individual words unprompted. At about 2 years, they can usually use 2 words together. They can follow simple instructions, demonstrate an interest in other children, and they can point to an object or picture when it's named. So where's your eyes? They'll point to the eyes. Where's your nose? And so on. Where's daddy's car? Where's mommy? All these they will usually be able to do. At about 3 years, they'll show affection for playmates, use 4 to 5 word sentences, imitate adults and other playmates, play make-believe with dolls, animals, people. So for example, putting your dolly to bed, feeding your dolly, bathing dolly and so on, sayang dolly. At 4 years, usually they're using 5 to 6 word sentences, following 3-step commands, so able to say, able to tell them in the morning, go and get dressed, comb your hair, wash your face, go and eat breakfast. 3 steps, usually they'll be able to do it, and they'll usually be able to play cooperatively with other children. So it goes back to what Kenneth was talking about earlier. What is autism? Okay, not coordinated, sorry. Some people have thought about it as a puzzle, okay? And that's why when you look at all the autism logos all over the world, you'll find that there are lots of puzzle pieces in it. Some have explained it as a bucket full of several different puzzles, and some missing a few pieces, and some thrown in with pieces that don't actually belong to that puzzle, just to confuse, because it has been a very confusing disorder to think about and to explain. I mean, up to now, I think we don't know what the actual cause. We don't have a single gene that explains what autism is due to. We know it's neurodevelopmental, we know it's something in the brain, but why the brain has, how it's wired differently to manifest as symptoms of autism spectrum disorder, we don't really know at this point. Lots of theories out there, but nothing that really says this is the reason for autism. Autism is comes from the word autos, which is Greek for self. So that's how they've described the children, especially when they first were described by the doctors in the early 1940s. They were children who were very much in their own world. And I think that's another problem, It is not a diagnosis that we make in the rest of medicine, where you do a physical examination, do some tests, do a brain scan and say, okay, this is what the diagnosis is. Autism spectrum disorder is diagnosed when you see a certain pattern of development and behavior. And it has been described by the British as a triad of impairments. So the problems being and the challenges being in social communication, social interaction, and in some behaviors and play. It is one of the most common diagnoses that we do see in the department which I work in, which is the Department of Child Development. And we see about 20 to 25% of the children who come into the department at their first visit receiving a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. We also know that it's more commonly diagnosed in boys than in girls. So, as I said, it's defined by a pattern of a child's pattern of development, behavior, and learning. There's no confirmatory brain scan or blood test. It's diagnosed by taking a very detailed history. So we spend about an hour with a family at least at that first visit, taking a very detailed history about their development, about any medical issues, about the birth history, about everything actually, how the family is functioning and things like that. We also do a careful observation through communicating, playing, and working with the child. And usually the psychologist will do the second part of the assessment after the history taking, and she will do certain tests to help with this observation in a more structured and way. And of course, we try and get information from other people who are in contact with the child, so caregivers, teachers, the school, other educators, catechists, and so on. So this is the new diagnostic criteria. It's very complex, and I won't really go through this. Just wanted to say that there are 3 things that they're looking at: social communication, social interaction, and then restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. I guess the other thing is that this should be present in the early developmental period. The old criteria was it must be present before the age of 3, some of these symptoms. And it should cause some clinically significant impairment in some context of the child, either in school, in social functioning, for adults in occupation, and so on. And I think the last thing is that these issues should not be explained better by a history of global developmental delay or intellectual disability. Because we know sometimes when a child has global developmental delay, meaning they are delayed in their development across a lot of different domains, their social development is also affected because their language development is affected. So for ASD, their social functioning should be it should be affected more than what you can predict by their language development. So the 3 areas are the challenges with social interaction. So we're talking about things like eye contact, joint attention, which I'll go through, sharing of enjoyment of whatever, toys or things, activities that they like, reciprocal interaction. These are things that the children may be challenged with. Challenges with social communication, so they may present with delayed language skills, and that's one of the most common things that parents will bring their children to the doctors for, that their child is not speaking yet, even though they may be 2 or 2+. Speech content or production, how they talk, what they talk about, and initiating and sustaining conversations. These are things that may be challenges to children and people with autism. And they may have problems with pretend play and may be preoccupied with unusual objects. So this impairment of communication, it's a real, it's helpful to think about autism as a spectrum, as Kenneth mentioned, really one end of the spectrum to the other. So a child may present, or a person may present with no speech, absent speech, or they may present with talking, but they may talk in an off-tangent way. They may say things, they may repeat what you say after them. So for example, you may say, "What's your name?" and they'll repeat back, "What's your name?" They may talk about things repetitively as well, or they may actually be able to communicate quite well, but they may not talk about the things that may be pertinent to what's going on then. So one story that a visitor from the UK, from NAS, came, and she said, when Princess Diana, okay, that's how long ago, Princess Diana went to visit one of the NAS offices in the UK, the first person, one of the persons there asked, helpers there asked her was, "Which train did you come on?" Instead of greeting her as Her Royal Highness or whatever, his interest was in train schedules. So he was only interested in which train she came on. So in a way, he communicates, but he doesn't communicate in a, I guess, relevant way for that time at that point in time, and maybe to that person as well. So that communication spectrum can be very broad, and a child can go through that entire spectrum as well. So social relationships as well, it can be very, quite different. So some children are completely in their own world, very aloof. You call them, they may not respond. On the other hand, you may have children who are passive. So they may respond, but they're basically quite all right if you do anything, to them, in the sense that they're quite happy to be left alone. And sometimes that's a challenge for the kids that we see who are in the mainstream kindergarten, because they're not really participating, but because they're not really giving much, not disruptive, and not much attention is given to them as well. And they're just passively sitting in the corner, which is not great, but I guess some children still learn anyway. Then there's the other end of the spectrum, where they are very active, but they have different ways of approaching a person. So they do want to make contact, they do want to approach you, but they have unusual ways of doing that. So an example that I usually, I've seen in clinic is sometimes that there was a child who was very interested in, different things. This one is a child who likes to count, and he came and counted. I thought of moles, so they came and counted the moles on my upper arm and sort of was counting it throughout. So it's just not the right, I guess, not the right way. Although I was fine with it, but they just have different ways of approaching people, but they are interested in making contact, but they don't quite know how to do it. Impairment of imagination. So some kids. We expect kids to play, imaginatively by about 18 months or so, but some children with ASD may only do it for sensation. So for example, a toy car, normally kids will move them around, park the cars, make accidents happen, and go on the highway and things like go to someone's house with a car. But for a child with ASD, they may not be interested in actual playing with the car. They may not use the car as a car. So he may turn the car upside down and play the wheels, because he likes looking at the wheels turning, because that is a form of visual stimulation for him. So they may not play imaginatively with the toys. They may not be able to do pretend play at a very early age, and they may not be able to invent a very imaginary world. But on the other hand, children do learn, and many of the kids do this, but maybe a little bit later than the other children. Okay, of course, if you look at, some of the things online, some of the autism savants, they've invented amazing imaginary worlds. I think there's a person in France who's drawn imaginary worlds which are amazing, actually. So I would say this is how children may present, but they don't always stay like that. Repetitive behaviors, this is the third part of that diagnostic part. Remember, social communication, social interaction, and repetitive behaviors. So some children may stimulate themselves by turning themselves around. They may be fascinated with sensory stimuli, like looking at the fan. They may have some routines involving objects. They may have verbal routines. So, for example, we had a child who would come home from school and would want to read the same books, 8 books. The mom says 8 books. Must read those same 8 books in the same order every day when she comes home from school. They may have routines related to a special skill, or they may have topics of special interest, just like the training schedule, but not so common here. So you can see that it's a real spectrum of disorders, and you may have children who are on the more severe end of the spectrum with Kanner or classical autism, or you may have children who are relatively high functioning, which they used to term Asperger's syndrome. They have relatively good verbal language, but they do still have difficulties with social and communication skills. Children with Asperger's sometimes have normal or above average IQs, but they still have a restricted range of interest and relatedness. So some of the things that we look for in early childhood that might discriminate children, what we look out for. Some researchers have described babies, but I have to say I don't often see this, although we ask about it every time. Some have described perfect babies who are just content just to be left alone, very good, very passive, very hypoactive babies. On the other hand, there are people who have described very difficult babies who scream around the clock, have difficulty sleeping, and are not really comforted when you carry them or hold them. So we don't always see this, but it's just been described by researchers. Peculiar peculiarities of hearing, I think this is something that we definitely look out for children who come or present with language delay. They may not respond to their name. So it's almost like they have a hearing impairment. But if you do the hearing test, they don't actually have a hearing loss. They just don't seem so affected and tuned into the environment. Yet, in the same child, you might see that they are very sensitive to certain sounds. All right, despite being very hypersensitive to call of their name, they may be very sensitive to certain sounds. So there's a child who can hear the father, when the father comes home and the key turns in the door, he can hear that and he'll run to the door, okay? And they may be fascinated with certain sounds as well, whereas certain sounds cause very extreme distress. So we don't know whether it's how they perceive the sound, and probably it is a perception kind of issue. Gaze, we know that people with autism do not really like eye contact. They find it uncomfortable, almost painful, I think, for some people. So there's less looking at others when they talk, and they may not appear to see people. On the other hand, we do have a few children also, especially if they present a bit older, where they have a very intense stare, a very unusual quality of the gaze. So sometimes we do see that as well. Sorry. Okay, so gaze is... okay, the unusual quality of the gaze. Sorry, the slide before this was the hearing. Okay, joint attention. This was the one where we were saying if a parent usually, when you teach your child how to talk, usually you will point things out and teach them what that object is. But for children with autism, sometimes it's very hard to get their attention to what you want them to look at. So you may point out things to them, but they don't follow your finger, which is unusual actually. So they won't look at what the parents point out at. They also have difficulty following that, making a gaze shift. Now, okay, for example, we are talking in a meeting. Someone comes in, or I know someone is coming in and I look there. The natural thing is for the rest of the meeting people to go look there as well, because we all have that kaypoh kind of quality, right? But for a person with autism, they may not. They don't really notice that you've looked elsewhere. They will just carry on doing what they're doing. So that's it's a different. I guess it's a different priority for them. Yeah. The picture there actually is wrong. It was joint attention initiated by the child and not the mummy. That means the child was actually pointing out something and mummy looked. Whereas what we were trying to say about teaching a child is the other way around. Mummy points and child looks, but in this case it was the other way around. Okay, the other thing is, a lot of the kids do present with speech and language delays, but even though, so for example, a child with hearing impairment may present with speech and language delays. They may not be speaking because they don't have much hearing stimulation, so they don't have the language stimulation, but they will compensate. Usually children with hearing impairment, they will compensate by pointing, by using gestures, right? But for a child with autism, they may not use these non-verbal ways of compensating for their lack of language. So they may not point to what they need. They may not be able to sort of share. For example, if they like, a child likes Hello Kitty or Angry Bird or whatever, they'll usually point it out to the parent when they see it. Let's say you walk past the store and there's an Angry Bird there, and they'll point it out to you and show, hey, mommy, look, there's an Angry Bird. But a child with ASD may not do this, and they may not share what they find interesting. They may not share what they enjoy. They may just go up to the object, but they may not actually point it out to you. They may bring it to you to ask you to buy it, but they may not actually share that interest or enjoyment. Some of the children also used an adult hand as a tool. So for example, they may not point to, for example, okay, we have a container of sweets in our clinic room, which is terrible, right? But they may not point to the sweets. They may not ask you to open the sweets. They may take the whole jar of sweets, put the parent's hand on top of the jar, the cover, and get the parent's hand to turn. So that's their way of telling you, open this jar of sweets for me. It's not the usual way. He's using the parent's hand as a tool. Another example would be opening a door. Normally, children will point at the door and then cry, or if they don't have language yet. But this child may leave the parent's hand there, put the parent's hand on the doorknob, and try and make that understand. And all this is maybe done without actually looking to check back at the parent to see whether the parent understood. The understanding for the child is that the parent will know, which is not quite the case, especially if it's not the parent but other caregivers. They may not also use a lot of conventional gestures, like waving, head nodding, or shaking to indicate yes or no. Video.
Do you know somebody with autism?
Sorry, other video. This is a video of a mum and her child. I think it's a QuickTime video on the desktop. Technology challenge. I have to play from desktop, I think, because there's no QuickTime embedded in this thing. It's open, yeah, and then full screen.
There's a hamster and there's a horse. There's a fish. Should we look at a fish? Oh, there's a deer and that's the sheep. And the duck. Quack, quack, quack.
So he's about one plus.
What's that?
I think Mum started off by pointing out something on the wall, and then he looked, right? And then he continued that conversation by pointing out other things to the mum, right? So I just wanted to show you that there are all sorts of these little interactions that take place quite commonly in a toddler's life that are things that we look out for when a child presents with speech and language delay. So things like pointing to objects that they want, pointing out things that they're interested in, as well as joint attention. When other people point, does the child actually look and pay attention? Social interaction, social smile, as I mentioned, usually around 6 weeks of age, an infant will have some social smile. Facial expression, but for children, young infants with autism, it may be a bit delayed. Facial expression may not reflect what he actually feels. Some children with autism may have a bit of a flat kind of effect, but not all. Again, some children do show their expressiveness. They may not be interested in other people around them if they're kind of aloof, and some children prefer to be alone, and they're quite happy entertaining themselves and playing by themselves. They may not be interested in the baby games that most infants enjoy, though this may develop later. So for example, the peekaboo games, I think that's common. All the pat a cake and kind of imitation games, Incy Wincy Spider and all that, which you do with a 6 to 9 month old. They may not be so interested when they're young, but as they grow older, many of these kids do also develop this. They do have difficulties with make-believe and pretend play, as I mentioned. Rigidity is one of the concerns, I think. People with autism, children with autism, prefer things to be predictable to them. They do function better if they know what's happening next. So transitions, changes can be challenging for them. Some children get upset when routines are changed, so when the route of going to school is changed, going to grandma's house is changed, if they stop at a different MRT stop, they may not be very happy. Some kids like to wear the same clothes in the same order. Some kids like to wear the same pair of shoes, so I know of parents who have bought the same pair of shoes in different sizes so that the child doesn't need to go through that transition of changing. But even then, sometimes they don't like it new. They still like the old shoe. Some kids play in a very, they like to arrange the toys in a very precise, orderly fashion. But again, not every child. Sensory integration difficulties, they're visual. So some kids like to look out of the corner of the eye, look at a turning fan, look at turning wheels. Some children like to look at the escalator moving, some like to look at the lift display and the numbers changing, or LED display changing. Sometimes they may also have aversions looking at certain things. So know of a child who didn't like glowing curtains, was very fearful of that. Then auditory also, many children with ASD, when they are very young, may be afraid of loud machinery noises. So things like renovation works, drilling, hand dryer, hair dryer, vacuum cleaner, blender, these are things that children may, at the time of presentation, may not like. They may not like announcements from PA systems, or they don't like things like, that maybe the microphone, people speaking through a microphone like now, or at shopping malls. And a child I knew would cry when the congregation clapped in church, so it was a bit distressing for the child. But on the other hand, we have children who are very attuned to certain sounds, and they may have a very good innate sense of rhythm and music. There's a young girl that I know who can play by ear. By the time she was about 6, fairly complex pieces. I think she's on Facebook. Another thing that parents usually tell us is when a young child with ASD going to cut hair is like satsu, like slaughtering a pig. We don't know what the reason is. I mean, it could be many reasons. Some children with ASD don't like the head to be touched, so wearing caps, washing hair, combing hair, all that is an issue. But it could also be the sound of the razor, which is, or it could be the feeling of the hair falling on the neck. So it could be a lot of reasons. So I guess it's just a lot of different things that they may have some concerns with. Oral hypersensitivity, I think a lot of kids don't like brushing their teeth when they're very young. They may not like to eat certain things or certain textures. Another thing is a high pain threshold, and some kids present with that, and that can be dangerous sometimes. I've had stories of children who come home from kindergarten with a toenail almost torn off, but nobody has noticed, and he has not told anyone. It was only during the bath that mum noticed that there was something wrong there. So these are some sensory issues that the children might have. But I think one message is that I think, especially when you talk to teachers will say, I had a child with ASD in the class and he was nothing like yours, so your child doesn't have ASD. But I have to say that children with ASD, just like what Kenneth said, may be very different from one another, right? Especially if they're at different ends of the spectrum, or even if they're not on the different end of the spectrum, because the symptoms can vary and look very different at different ages. Certain features don't appear till later, and others disappear with time. So for example, that looking at the fan or looking at the wheels may be present when the child is about 2, but when he's 4, 5, it may not be there anymore. So autism affects development, and in turn, development affects autism. Girls much less seen. So I think there's been some research to look into this as well, because how they present may also need some education as to why. I think the difference is that I think we are missing a lot of the girls because we don't know how they actually present. So they may camouflage or compensate or mask their symptoms a lot better. They may be more chatty, less disruptive, but actually all this is actually very stressful and tiring for them as well. So a girl has been quoted as saying, I don't like making eye contact. I do it because I have to and I know it's appropriate, but it tires her out. And I guess what we are trying to do is, I think, not to miss out some of these girls when we present, rather than have them diagnosed late. Like on average, they are diagnosed at least 2 years later than the boys. Okay, some red flags, I think these you will know. By 12 months, no babble, pointing or gesture, no single words. By 18 months, by 24 months, not putting 2 words together. But at any age, if there's any loss of language or skills. Just a couple of messages. I think the health booklet is very helpful. It actually has red flags, and the red flags for autism. Oh no, sorry, I forgot to move this thing. Health booklet. Okay, every child in Singapore has one. So there are red flags, which are in the every health booklet. I think more recent ones, not the old ones. There are red flags for the 12 to 18 month old, the 2 years to 3 years, and the 4 to 6 years old. So look for the appropriate age for the child. Seeking help, use the fact sheets and all these health booklet things. Okay, write down your concerns, any questions that you have. Talk to your child's other caregivers like grandma, teachers, and so on. Use the locally available materials which are here. I think what you want is to bring it to, not to wait too long. As a parent, you do know your child best. I think, I would say that if you can, I just wanted to say for referrals, for public hospitals, going through the polyclinic gives you subsidized rates. If you go yourself or if your GP or pediatrician refers you, then you will have to pay private rates. And there are different rates for PR and non-residents. So I guess if cost, it does make a huge difference to cost. These are the different places where the children can be seen. If they're preschoolers, the Child Development Unit in NUH as well as KK, Department of Child Development, are the places that you can get some help in terms of assessment and diagnosis. For the older children, Child Guidance Clinic or any of the psychological medicine units in KK, NUH and KTPH will also have services for children above the age of 7. Some websites, and I think the main message that I have is you know your child best. Use the resources that you have in front of you, like the health booklet. Avoid prolonged waiting and watching. Seek help early if there are any concerns, because early detection does make a difference. Okay. Yeah, thanks, sorry.
Thanks so much, Dr. Chu. For many parents, the diagnosis of knowing that their child has autism spectrum disorder is just the first step in a long journey that they take to ensure the well-being of their child. Very frequently after the first point of diagnosis, the things that parents have to think about would be issues of early intervention. Now, what can they do to further support their child so that the child will be as ready as possible for schooling? Also, some other children with autism might find that they have difficulties adjusting in traditional school environments. So the question that parents typically have very early in the child's life and right after diagnosis is this entire question of, now, how can I help my child? How can I best support him or her so that my child can receive as rich an educational experience as possible? So to address that issue, we have with us Ms. Genevieve Chua. Genevieve is a person who believes very strongly that working families to guide their child is the way to go, because the family is where the child spends most of his or her own time. So Genevieve has worked as a teacher in a special school, as well as a psychologist involved in the assessment and diagnosis of children at a local hospital. Genevieve is now in private practice where she has set up with the intent of working together with families. And she's going to talk to us about educational issues and interventions. So, Genevieve.
Okay. One of the things that I'm going to talk about, although we talk about education, I wanted to say that education is not just about academics. So what I'm going to share with you is not just going to be purely academics. We're going to look at it in terms of how the child processes information. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. But one of the things that I'm passionate about is that there should not be a generic list of therapies that we go to. When we worked in the hospital, one of the things we used to have this checklist. Something I've since regretted doing, where parents will come and see us, we'll do the diagnosis, then we'll give them a checklist of, okay, now your child has been diagnosed, you gotta go and see the speech therapist, the OT, da-da-da-da-da-da. The thing is, like what Kenneth and what Dr. Chu has been saying, every child is different. Every child is an individual. So why would there be a generic list of things that you should do? There shouldn't be, right? So one of the things that we need to do is we need to observe. We need to understand what about my child, what about this child that we need to help, we need to guide. So look at the individual needs. And I'll go through a few rather quickly. A few more I'll spend a bit more time. So for example, just because a child has autism does not mean that they don't have medical concerns. I've met many children with medical issues that impact them in a similar way, and it also hinders the way they process information and the way that they can develop. For one child I work with, the recent haze, we could actually use him as a haze meter. Because the minute his nose starts dripping, to check the haze, you can be sure it's above 100 already. Alright? That's how accurate he was. But it just goes to show, imagine if you're physically uncomfortable. How present are you going to be when you're working on things that are difficult for you? Not very present, right? So you got to check, does the child have medical issues? Motor issues. A lot of our kids have difficulties with their fine motor, with their gross motor, even with sitting up straight. Now this is a personal issue I've always had. Throughout my life, from young, teachers have always said, Jen, don't slouch, sit up straight. My mom too, sit up straight. The thing is, what we've discovered is that when you tell someone to sit up straight, you're actually targeting a different area of their brain. Did you know that the ability to sit up straight is actually your brainstem? All right? So what does that mean? That means your brainstem controls all your motor. And it's supposed to be subconscious. It's not something that you do consciously. So you actually have to work on building your brainstem and not using other parts of your brain, like your cortex, when someone tells you to sit up straight. So what happens when you do that? When you do that, the child draws resources from other parts of their brain, and it impacts the way they attend and other factors, all right? So that's why we don't want to just tell a person, sit up straight. We actually have to work on what is the issue, the motor issue. Processing. Many of our kids have processing issues. Auditory processing, visual processing. Find out if these are some of the issues. Like MUH does assessments and screening for people with auditory processing. Visual processing, it's not just about can see, cannot see. A lot of our kids can see, but how do they process that information? Some of our kids have irregular tracking. Some of them, their eyes don't converge well, so they can't really see. Some of them, their saccadic eye movement, that means, the way their eyes jump, they jump at irregular speeds. So you've got to find out, is this an issue that my child faces? Because if it is, it's going to impact the way they read. It's going to impact the way they perceive things that are going on around them. Sensory, like Dr. Chu has described. I have one boy, he describes his sensory issues. He doesn't go to church, very sad to say. And the reason he doesn't go to church is because when he goes to church, there are babies that cry. Right? Where are you going to find a mass where babies don't cry? No. So he can't go to church because he knows that babies will cry. And how he's described it like it's like thunder in his ears. It's so painful for him. He really physically cannot be present when babies cry. It bothers him that much. Even when he wears the sound reducing headphones, it's still not enough. Right? So I don't know if that church can do anything about babies crying or having a special place for him, but he can't go to church right now. The other area that we look at is communication. For communication, I think one of the key things is we're always concerned that my child doesn't talk, right? For kids that are not so verbal. I think the main concern is we need to look at the whole bandwidth of communication and not be satisfied whether your child can or cannot talk. Why limit your child to only can or cannot talk? Do you know that non-verbal communication, like what Dr. Chu has described, is actually established in babies before the age of 2. Now, if our kids are missing out on so many channels of communication, then we're actually limiting them. And we shouldn't just focus on just verbal communication, but the whole entire bandwidth. So for example, one of the examples I always like to give is, you know, if someone were to tell you, oh wow, you're so clever, versus, wow, you're so clever. I'm saying the same thing, but it means very different things, right? So if we don't teach our kids, if we don't help our kids to have that wide bandwidth of communication, then they're missing out. It's like everybody has broadband channel TV, and this fella only has TCS 5. Not enough, right? You want more for your kids. Don't limit your children. Demand more. So when you go for therapy, when you go for a speech therapist, you know, make sure your speech therapist is also covering that bandwidth of communication. And this applies for kids that are verbal as well. A lot of our kids do not process the non-verbal that's going on around them. One of our boys who just went into secondary 1 this year, he was made an assistant monitor. So when he was given his duty to do, what happened was his classmate, being helpful, was trying to help him. He interpreted it as, she wanted to take over my job. So you can imagine the ruckus that ensued. Thankfully, he had a very attuned teacher who quickly set them both down and got them to have a dialogue so that he could understand that his classmate was trying to help him, not take over his entire job. Alright? So this is what I mean. They need to learn to read these non-verbal cues, and they need to also be aware of the non-verbal cues that they send out. You know, about a lot of our kids, some of them are very smiley, right? No matter what, they're smiling. And then people always say, oh, he's such a happy kid. No, he's probably very stressed. And he's just smiling to mask his stress. Or he doesn't know how else to react, so he's smiling. He's not necessarily a very happy kid. But that's the message that they send out. And then when the bullies come, bullies love this sort. Because they go and chocho and then you get a smile. Right? Wow, short reaction, man. I had one boy who was cornered in a school by a group of bullies, and they wanted him to do something, and they were going to record it and post it on social media. Okay? So you do get these sorts, and they have to be mindful of the non-verbal that they send out as well. I'm not saying the bullies are right, but they also have to be mindful on their part. There's a difference, I feel, between just static learning and dynamic thinking. I think what we want to teach our children is, whilst academic learning is important, being able to think and problem solve is even more important. Because we cannot teach them every single problem and every single solution to every problem, because we don't know what they are. I had one child who was in primary 1. I think he was in the first week of school, and lo and behold, the school bus didn't pick him up to send him home. Picked up everybody else in his class and all that, and he was left behind for whatever reason. Alright? So, what did he do? He found it, and by the way, his teacher went home already, so he couldn't find his teacher also. But he found the teacher from the class next door. who brought him to the office and then got the school bus to come back and send him home. But when he got back, Mom asked him, what if you couldn't find that teacher? You know, what are you going to do? So he said, it's okay what? The office is still open. I just go to the office and then I ask someone at the office to call and help me. That is dynamic thinking, okay? That's the ability to think and to problem solve. And that's what we need our kids to do, because we cannot help them solve every problem when we don't know what they are. Behavior. As a psychologist and a teacher, I'm sure you can guess that this is something that I feel very strongly about, behavior. And a lot of teachers, a lot of parents always want good behavior, want compliance. And I will always say, don't ask for compliance. Because compliance suggests that it is mindless. Why would you want your child to comply? You want your child to cooperate, but not comply, okay? Because we have had children, or rather, not someone I work with, but one of the parents told me, her neighbor, the maid loves working with that family, loves the child, because the child will do everything that the maid says. But the child does not initiate anything on their own. Even playing the swing. He has to be told, hey, you're going to play the swing now. Okay, you can stop playing the swing. Now you're going to play with the slide. Okay, you can stop playing with the slide. Why would you want that for your child? What's the future going to be like for that child? You know, you don't want mindless compliance. So with that in mind, when you see a behavior, things like stimming, things like meltdown, the first thing you ask yourself, what is it about that behavior? What is the child trying to communicate with that behavior? Because every challenging behavior is a communication, okay? Stimming, for example. For many kids, stimming is because I'm feeling dysregulated. Whether that dysregulation is an emotional stress, whether that dysregulation is boredom, whatever that dysregulated feeling is, usually they will do something like stimming. So what we do is we usually try and shift them, instead of stimming, to regulation with something that's more acceptable, more appropriate. Okay? We all regulate. All of us regulate every single day of our lives. Our kids sometimes don't know how to regulate in the best way, and it comes across as stimming. Okay? So we always need to look and see what a behavior is communicating to us. It is not about resolving the behavior. It is understanding what that behavior is about. Because if you just work on resolving that behavior, I can guarantee you something else is going to come up and take its place, because you have not resolved the underlying issue. Social and emotional. As Dr. Chu described, a lot of our kids face a lot of issues in terms of their social and emotional aspects. Okay? And one of the things is, it's not a lack of desire to want to engage. They all want to engage. But sometimes they don't do it appropriately. Or sometimes the motivation maybe is not quite there, or it overrides, it's overridden by other things. So I'll give you an example to explain that. One of our boys, he's a very, very bright boy. And he tells me his classmates all think he's very obnoxious. So I asked him, well, why do your classmates think you're obnoxious? He said, well, it's because I talk a lot. But you see, the reason I talk a lot is because I'm right, and I know the answers. So you can imagine how popular he's going to be with all his classmates. So that's the thing. Sometimes it's not, for us, we know the social aspect is more important. It's not about always being right. Okay? So how do we help our kids deal with some of these things and navigate? I think one of the most important things is just to find out first. Investigate. Are these some of the issues that my child experiences? If these are the issues that my child experiences, how do I go about dealing with them? Whether then you do go to an OT to work on sensory issues, to work on the motor issues, whether you go to see a speech therapist, to work on communication, or whether you look for a psychologist or behavioral to work on the other aspects. but investigate what are the aspects first before you go down that checklist. I must see this person, this person, this person, okay? And find out if the child has any other co-occurring issues. So co-occurring issues are like, do they have learning concerns? Do they have reading issues as well, like dyslexia? So find out these things before we jump too far. So one of the things parents always ask, how to find out? I'm only a parent, I don't know much. Actually, you know a lot more than you think. A lot of it comes through observation. Watch your child. When you watch your child, you will start to learn things. You know, one of the moms always said to me once, hey, you're very good, you know him, you can read him. I said, no, I'm not very good. I just learn through watching. And the more you watch, the more you'll learn about your child. So observe, and then identify what are the key issues that you want to work on. Now, this is the area that I'm going to talk about in terms of the how. Alright? As Kenneth has described, autism is a neurodevelopmental issue. A lot of times people have worked on it in terms of behavior. I'm going to ask you to think about it differently. Think about it in terms of working on the brain and on processing. Okay? Now, what you see here is you see neurons. Every one of us, when we are born with a set of neurons that are not connected. It's the experiences that we have that then connect these neurons. So what that means is that the experiences that we have will help the way our kids wire their brains. Alright? So, skills are important. Families that work with me will always know that I always emphasize processes though. So while skills, learning to, skills are things like learning your ABCs, folklores and all that, very important. But I think it's also equally, if not more important, to teach our kids, to guide our kids to have processes. And processes are not taught. Processes are guided. But the good thing about processes is that when you teach a child in terms of the way their brain develops, when you get a child to make these connections in their brain, guess what? You don't have to worry about generalization. The thing is with skills is that a lot of people always wonder, hey, I teach him how to write, then is he going to generalize? Or one of the things that we used to do when we were working in the hospital is we came up with a whole bunch of programs, got them to have their social stories and all that, make sure they know how to go out and socialize with their friends. Guess what? When we went and watched them in a mainstream environment, none of this translated. That's the thing with skills. You always worry, can it generalize? But if you change the way they think and they process that information, guess what? They bring their brain with them everywhere. You don't have to worry about generalization. It's inside, it's there with them. So, with that said, I always like to leave families or leave people that I share information with something to bring back. It will not resolve all your issues, but hopefully it will help a little bit, okay? Now, one of the first things to do is to slow down and wait. Waiting is important because a lot of our kids on the spectrum, when they process information, they usually process information in a way that is delayed compared to other people. So you need to give them time to process and think. With that said though, even for us, if something is more complex, it will also take us longer to process information and to think about it and to problem solve. When we think about things fast, you know how we always try and get kids to answer things fast, quick, give me the answer? It requires very little thinking, right? Anything that you do fast, anything that's automatic is already up here. It does not require new thinking, it does not require new challenges, okay? So for example, I always like to give examples because I think that helps people learn more. We have these cards, or it can be anything. The main idea is just to slow down and to wait, okay? Now, if you give a child a card, say 1, And then I have to arrange 2. Number 4. No, number 3. Oh dear, how? What are we going to do with no number 3? And you happen to have paper, pencil, some of this available. Any ideas? How? No number 3, Thoughts? What can we do? Sorry?
Drop number 3.
Very good. Draw number 3. Okay? So you create an opportunity for a child to problem solve. But guess what? You have to slow down and wait. You don't go, hello, that give away the answer already. Where's the thinking involved? When you do that, what happens is that your brain is doing the work, not the child's brain. Don't overcompensate. Wait. Then the other thing I'm often asked is, how long do I wait, And my answer is, I don't know. It depends on the child. That's the observation part. Watch the child. The child will give you a clue as to how long to wait. If the child starts to have a meltdown, you waited too long. Okay? So watch your child. Over time, you will see how long that you need to wait before you help the child move on. Alright? And one more thing I want to leave you with that I think is so important is use non-verbal communication. And it's very important because when you use non-verbal communication, you actually encourage that social process. Daniel Siegel, he's one of the gurus in neuroscience, one of my idols. We managed to see him once when he came to Singapore. Exciting. He's like the rock star, in neuroscience. So anyway, one of the things he says about social media nowadays is that social media takes away a lot of that non-verbal. Okay? And when it takes away all that non-verbal, our kids are actually missing out on the processing of things like facial expression, body language, gestures, the intensity with which somebody says something, the voice tone with which they put something across. So much of communication they're missing out on. And that's why we need to use it, so that they learn and they have the opportunity to process all of that. Remember, we want that broadband channel, not single channel. And the other thing is, they learn to monitor other people, to read other people, because a lot of times they're not paying attention to people and what's going on around them. So we do need to get them to focus on others and to look, what is that person trying to communicate? Yes, they're saying something, but a lot of people say something, but they mean another thing, right? Or people don't say, but they actually not happy. Correct? So that's the thing. We need our kids to be able to read it because nobody is going to explain every single thing to them. And if they don't read it, then they're missing out a lot of that communication. Alright? And I'll show you one thing that ties in with slowing down. A short little demonstration, if you will. And I'll wrap it up. Can I, if you, very hard to get volunteers, so I'll get you come. Very good. Thank you. My thing's very messy. Can you help me back? Where is his focus and attention?
On the things.
On the things, right?
Yeah.
It's not on me. Watch out. Where's his focus and attention?
On the
Right?
facial.
So just by slowing down and changing the way I do it, he's still keeping things, it's still the same thing, I'm still doing the same action, but I slowed down and I made it about me. Very ego lah, okay, what can I say? You make it about yourself and your kids will start to pay attention to you and not just the things that they are focused on and interested in. Alright? Okay. So to round off, these are all resources, books, if you're interested in reading more. These are all websites where you can get access to a lot of free information. I know we don't have that much time to cover that much today. So read up about it, and our Facebook page, one of our sites, very hardworking. She posts a lot of stuff every day, not just on ASD, but a lot of other stuff as well. All right? So hopefully I've left you all with something helpful, useful to bring home. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Genevieve. I think one of the very important things that she highlighted is about the role that family members can play. There is so much that we can do, and very frequently as family members we get so anxious for good reasons about how to catch up with the academics. But I think like what Jen is saying, there is a need for us to look at it more broadly and to journey along with the child. Whilst the child is in school, our focus as family members is very frequently targeted at the issue of education. Children with autism do grow up. And about 5 years ago, my colleagues and I were engaged in this investigation of how parents feel about the time after a point where they are no longer able to care for their children. That is, in many sense, something that is not always on the radar of those of us with school-going children. At the same time, it is also very important because education accounts for the first 18 years of the child's life. There is at least double the duration after that. So to help us to think about this issue, as well as other legal issues that sometimes complicate lives of individuals with autism spectrum disorders, we are very lucky to have with us Mr. Nicholas Au. Nicholas was called to the Singapore Bar in 1994, and he now specializes in corporate estate management as well as criminal law. Very importantly, Nick is also the president of the Disabled Persons Association, and that's a cross-disability advocacy group that speaks out on issues affecting people with disabilities. And he's going to talk to us about estate planning and inappropriate social behavior that we sometimes see with autism in a legal context. So, Nick.
Alright, good morning. I was expecting to have this done after tea break because I'm hungry. Guess it's never a better time. So I was asked to give a talk on estate planning and inappropriate social behavior in the legal context. I had a hard time trying to figure out the title, but this talk is going to be divided into two aspects. The first is with regard to estate planning, and the second part would be on your kid or a mentally challenged adult in relation to the law. Okay. So what I say in most of these cases is quite applicable to most of us, because it is the law. The law applies without reservation to all adults and children. So, with regard to the first topic about estate planning, when you grow up, when you plan for your children, there are several things you can do. One is to set up a trust. Okay, trust is when you plan ahead, you have money in a bank account or in shares or investments, and you engage a family office or private trust. So these are one way of setting up money for your children, and whether they have special needs or not. The second one is the CPF nomination. Okay? This is applicable to everyone who has a CPF account. When you get married, you have to renominate your CPF beneficiaries. I don't know if any of you know that. So those who got married recently, if you had a nomination before, you have to renominate again. Okay? And this is how you can choose to nominate people you want to have your CPF monies when you pass on. If you don't do that, the money will go into your estate and it will be distributed according to the Interstate Succession Act, which means that the complicated process. So it's better to nominate your kids or your loved ones for your CPF monies. A third method is by way of a will. And this is something which really amuses me quite often, because most of us, in my experience, a lot of people come to me and they say, hey, Nick, I want to do a simple will. And I say, what is a simple will? Right? Why is it to give everything to my son, or my wife, or girlfriend? Okay? But the trouble is, there's no such thing as a simple will. And the other issue I face is that many people who have got loads of money, they will download a template from the internet and then come to me and say, can you help me look through this? And I'm thinking, good Lord, you have so much money and you're willing to stinge over a few $100 to prepare a will. That is why you see in the newspapers so many reports of people fighting over money. So if you want to do something proper for your kid or your family, please spend that money. It's not a lot. I mean, I know you all have the perception that lawyers charge an arm and a leg, but there are lawyers who don't. I mean, there are quite few of them, but then, seriously, if you want to plan ahead for your future, please do a proper will through a lawyer who can lodge your will in the will registry. At least it's protected. Yeah? Then you will feel comfortable, okay? The next thing is the special needs savings scheme. This is a scheme from the government whereby you can, oh sorry, I forgot to move forward. Okay. Let me start with the private trust first. Like I was saying, that the private trust is a special trust that you create through a private company, and the other option is the special needs trust fund. The website is provided, and I think some of you have the notes. Yeah, so you can actually click on it. What is a trust? A trust is a legal relationship in which an individual or institution holds assets subject to a legal obligation to use assets for the benefit of another, usually your child or your loved one. So, in essence, it is basically keeping aside some money in a fund which will be used in the long run for your child. Whether it's a private trust or a government trust, like the Special Needs Trust Fund. Okay, with regard to the special private trust fund, this is something which most people will go for if you have got more cash to spare than normal. Yeah. So you have to engage a trust company, you have to pay brokerage fees, and there's going to be an individual appointed who is a specialist in this manner. I wouldn't usually suggest going through a trust fund unless you are one of those who have lots of money. But I think most Catholics have lots of money. I hear that most of you are donating to the Church of the Transfiguration, right? So if you have lots of money, prepare a trust fund for your kid. This will be good. If you need more information, I mean, I don't have the time to go through all this, but this is just for your knowledge. You can go and Google it. It's available online, like most people do. Yeah. The other option is the Special Needs Trust Fund. Okay. Again, it's all stated there. It's basically relying on a permanent body to manage and administer the money for your loved ones. There's a typo there, loved one. Yeah. There's someone here I know from the Special Needs Trust Fund who can give you more details on this, so I won't go into detail. Then there is the Special Needs Savings Scheme. This is developed by the MSF together with CPF. And basically, it is a free scheme for those who have insufficient savings to afford the trust fund. What happens is the parents can nominate their kids with disabilities to receive monthly payouts from their CPF account. There's no minimum balance for SNSS, but the money is payable on a yearly basis until the funds run out. Okay, this is very helpful for those who are from the lower middle to lower family structure. Okay, am I going too fast? If I am, please let me know, because I'm aware of the time that we have. Okay, this is the lasting power of attorney. Essentially, the power of attorney, lasting power of attorney gives you a right to make decisions for your future. But the caveat is that when you make this lasting power of attorney, you must have the capacity to make this LPA. And what this does is when you reach a certain age and you lose the capacity to make decisions, this provides for your financial and your care. So if you are able to think of what to do for your medical well-being or your financial situation, your loved one who you have given the power of attorney to will help decide for you. So it's not just applicable to kids who have disabilities, but also to you guys. So I see some, I mean, you guys are all quite healthy looking from here. But you never know when you get hit by a disability. We never know, okay? Like last night, we woke up, shocking news from France, right? Anything can happen. So if you haven't done it, go do it on Monday. You can download the forms from the website. Okay, now is a more interesting subject called the Mental Capacity Act. So the question is, what is mental capacity? And the simple definition is the ability to make a specific decision at a particular time. So what is the type of mental capacity? Do kids with autism lack mental capacity? The question to ask is, do they have the ability to make a decision? Does this impair their functioning of their brain or disturbs their functioning of the brain? So, in law, a person cannot understand the information or remember the information or balance information or communicate a decision, then that is a sign that he or she may not be able to have the mental capacity. There is a two-stage test for mental capacity. So the first step that the doctor will decide is, does the person have an impairment, as I mentioned earlier, or disturbance of the functioning of the brain? If so, does this impairment cause the person to be unable to make a decision when he needs to? And if this is determined by to be so, the doctor must state so in the medical report, because it is important for a certified doctor to state that this person, whether it's a child or an adult, be medically or be that does not have the ability to make decisions on his behalf. Okay, one of the ways that the law has offered people with disabilities who have unable to decide for themselves is this thing called an application under the Mental Capacity Act to appoint donors. So if you want to make a decision for your child, or a child who's above 21 years old, or then you'll be an adult then, okay, who is unable to decide for him or her, then you apply to court for to be a deputy for your child or for this adult mental disability. And for the court to appoint this deputy, it's a very stringent process. In fact, I would say it's a very painful process, because it determines the future of someone. So the court is very particular. They are very concerned that there may be abuse. So you actually can go to court for 3 or 4 visits to see the judge. And the judge will go through the application review and go through every order that you want. And he or she will ask you, what is the purpose of this order? I want this order to take care of his bank account. I want to take care of his home. I want to make sure he has enough money for his education. The court will scrutinize every aspect of the order, and you will go back for review every year. And you have to give an account of your expenditure for this application. It's not an easy application, and unfortunately, some lawyers will charge a lot for this. So again, if you need to do this, don't just go to one lawyer. Okay, no, call. Do what you guys do best. Go shopping. Ask around. But be careful of those lawyers who tell you, oh, I'll charge you $1,000 for this, because, like I said, it's a very complicated process. So some lawyers are known to charge a 5-figure figure for this, but I would think that an appropriate figure would be about between $3,000 to $5,000. It is pricey, but if you need legal aid, you can apply to them at the Legal Aid Bureau. application of the MCA is important because, like I said, if there's no lasting power of attorney, and your kid needs to go for medical treatment and needs to get consent, what do you do? For example, if he needs to go for surgery and he can't say, yes, I want to do this because he does not have the capacity to do so, what do? You need to be the deputy to say, yes, he can do this. But without this order, you are unable to do it. So that is a dilemma here. Yeah? Okay, that's about it for the estate planning part of the talk, this talk. I will now go on to the more serious part of it. Before I start, I'd like to highlight that the kids below 14 years old are defined in the Children and Young Persons Act. It's not covered in the notes here, but basically, if your kid is charged with an offense, I mean, I know it sounds very harsh, but the prosecution will decide on a case-by-case basis. And if the child is below 16 years old, he'll be charged in the juvenile court. If he's above 16 years old, he'll be charged in the state court. And whether he is charged in court or not is at the discretion of the Attorney General's chambers, and also depends on the severity of the offense. Okay. What happens when the defendant is suspected to be of unsound mind, where there's reason to believe that the defendant is unfit to plead to a charge? There will be an investigation by the medical officer to clarify, and a certificate from a medical officer to certify whether he or she is able to plead. In this regard, I'm pleased to inform you that the Law Society has come up with this scheme called the Appropriate Adult Scheme, whereby if a person with mental disability is charged in court or arrested for questioning, they may call the Law Society for an appropriate adult to accompany the defendant in court or in the police station to give a statement. And these appropriate adults is also called the Appropriate Adult Scheme or the AA scheme, whereby they are on 24-hour standby. Okay. To find out more information about this, you can go to the Law Society page and Google appropriate adults. So what happens is these adults are trained in talking to persons with disabilities, and they will assist the defendant to talk to the investigating officer. Because you can imagine if a person with disability is charged and he goes to court or to police station, he'll be very fearful. Okay, what happens how does the law treat persons with disabilities? From the material I've gathered over the years, it doesn't look very good for persons with disabilities because the balance is between the public interest and the interest of the offender. And it's always stated that the protection of the public is most important. So, as you can see from the quote from the former Chief Justice, and thank goodness for that, he's no longer around. And I'll say this to you guys, and no fear that he was very scary to appear before. Even as a lawyer. But this former judge, who's now the Attorney General, is a breath of fresh air. As you can see, he said that sentencing the mentally ill offender is one of the most difficult areas of judging. But again, the issue is deterrence or rehabilitation. I have acted for several persons with disabilities, ranging from bipolar to ADHD, and mainly bipolar, ADHD, never for autism, because I guess they don't get into trouble, you know? I've not seen one, so you guys should be thankful. But generally the law, I've had some cases. This is a very popular case. It's about shoplifting. It's in your notes, so okay, I've had 3 cases, but let me share with you one of the 2 cases that I've done. My client was a young boy who had bipolar disorder. And he was charged with molesting a girl, his doctor. So doctors, be careful. So what happened is that he went to court, and in court, during the pre-trial conference, the police officer came to see him. He was like, feeling very excited. So the whole court was, including the judge, was saying to me, your client is terrible. So the perception is there that if you have a disability, it's a negative inference. But then again, the court also has sympathy towards such people because they know that they cannot help themselves. So the judge told me that, look, if you can help me come up with a care plan to look after this boy, he was 18 years old, then we'll give him community work and probation. So I went to several doctors, we were able to get him probation, and thank God for that, because the father was quite, when I spoke to him, was quite sad, because he said, I don't want this son of mine, he's not my son. How can I have such a son? And I was quite shocked because this is a father talking about his son. So, you know, for us as parents or Catholics, it's inconceivable for us to say, this is not my child. So, but in the end, even after getting him probation, the father was like, oh, I thought of this for us for life. So it was a positive result with a not so happy ending because of the father. But having said that, he had a lecture for me later, and if you want to know what I said to him, you can come and see me later. Another case, several other cases that I've dealt with were kids who were charged with shoplifting and public nuisance. And they had a sympathy of the court. Because the court looks at the severity of the offense. If it's murder or drugs, the court will look at it differently, no matter what age your child is. If the child is below 16, it commits murder, he will be investigated, and if found to be of not sound mind, he will be detained at the president's pleasure because he's committed a serious offense. But if he has committed an offense such as shoplifting or assault, it's quite likely that they may not prosecute him. They may just say to you, look, Mr. Tan, I think you should spend more time with your child. Stop letting him go to the movies with his friends and spend time with him. So they can be quite sensible. But at the end of the day, it's about the ability of the child or the offender, whether he has the mental ability to plead to a charge. And that is a common issue that we face as lawyers, because the first thing is we can't take instructions. When we talk to them, they just go, the focus is on something else. It's not easy. So, to conclude on the case law, whereas I won't go into detail, sentencing principles for particular offences still take strong precedence over any mental conditions of the accused. So, like I said, for serious crimes like murder or drug trafficking, mental conditions will only be a mitigating factor if they have a connection with the commission of the offense. So, for example, if you are a person who is a wheelchair user and you commit murder or you shoplift, there is no connection between your disability and the offense. So the court will not take it as a mitigating factor. Right? I mean, there's no connection. So, oh, I can't walk. But there is no relevance to the offense you committed. But when rehabilitation is a consideration, especially for young persons, if this, for example, if he has a ADHD or bipolar, and he goes to a shopping center and he steals some sweets, then the court will look into the facts and say, yes, it is a factor to consider, and it will help the offender to either help him give a sentence for community service or probation, which is the most likely result. Sometimes, if you're lucky, the prosecution will withdraw the charge and give him a warning. So, that's the positive thing about sentencing in Singapore by the courts. The courts, okay, I have something here which I didn't put in here. Slide, okay. In the legal profession, over the past, since 1995 to now, we have seen a general progression in how people are sentenced in court. Advances in science have helped to shed light in how the judges sentence offenders with special needs. So it's quite helpful and to us that the courts will consider the nature of the disability before they convict someone. That's why the courts now have this thing called the community courts, whereby people with special needs or disabilities will be brought to that court to be charged or to be tried. So there is a movement away from the normal courts. They don't get special treatment, but the judges are more sympathetic to the needs of these people with special needs or special who have disabilities. Before I conclude, I just want to talk a bit about terminology, since I have some time. How many of you think that your child is suffering from ASD? I can see this. Okay. I'm now talking from a different hat. As some of you may know from the slides, I'm also the president of the Disabled People's Association. We are very concerned as to how we use terminology with regard to people with disabilities. So you may be quite pleased to know that in the last few years, there was a change in the name of the association called the Cerebral Palsy Group, formerly known as Spastics, right? So if you are in school and you are different, you use such words like that on you. So we are in a movement to improve or promote the use of proper terminology to describe people. So the reason why I ask that question is, I have a disability. Oh no, I have a condition. It's called Tourette syndrome. So it affects me the way I speak or the way I behave. But I don't consider myself suffering from this condition. Similarly, I think that you shouldn't, this is my opinion, and it's up to you to accept it or not. I don't think you should say that your child suffers from a disability or a condition. He has a condition. Because once you say he suffers from a condition, you put him down. So this is something that I wanted to raise it to you, but I didn't know where it was the time. But since, like I said, I have 5 minutes more, I'll take the opportunity to share this with you, because I think it's important when we talk to our children how we view them, because if we tell them you're no good, you have a disease, you will feel very, I'm not a doctor, but this is what I think as a layperson. If my parents used to say, oh, you're possessed. It's a bad habit. Get out of it, snap out of it. And I used to feel very lousy about myself. So I think that it is helpful to be, probably you heard this before, but you need to really be supportive and to encourage your kids. Yeah, they may have a disability, but they're no different from anyone else. Some of them have got special abilities, right? Okay, to conclude, takeaways. Yeah. Tea time soon? I missed breakfast this morning because I had no bread in the house. Okay, 3 things I want you to consider. If you forget everything else here, 3 things, apart from the terminology. The ability to make decisions that are legal is determined by one's mental capacity. So if we don't have the capacity, we can't make legal decisions. Okay, that's a fact. Okay? Second point. Mental capacity can affect how the court sentences an offender with disabilities. So as I mentioned, if it's a serious offense or it's a not so serious offense, it will help the court decide. Or if the offense is not related to your disability, the court will not take it into account. Okay, so again, the example of your wheelchair user and you commit theft. It's not an excuse to say I'm poor, so I commit theft. Okay, if you are a wheelchair user, you are disabled. There's no excuse to say I'm disabled, so this give you a chance. And finally, you need to be determined or assessed by a doctor, usually a specialist, I think, as to whether you have the necessary mental capacity to make decisions before, and you need it in a letter, not a note or email from the doctor to say, oh, Mr. Chua is disabled. No, you need a document called a medical report from the doctor to say, so and so is suffering from this AUD, and he is not capable of making decisions. But so far, I have not come across any persons with AUD that has been certified as not being able to make mental decisions. But I may be wrong, because I don't come across many such cases. So, tea time. So, thank you, and have a good day.